discussing anything at all.
No, nothing we were talking about. Do you see I have an emoji now?
Oh, good. I'm proud of it. Is it a nerdy one? Is it the one with you with the glasses?
Yeah, it's the one with the mystery person on Twitter.
I think I'm glad we don't have one for Eric yet, do we? I hope.
No, actually, I almost think it's funny if we never have one for him.
Oh, I agree. I think it's a hilarious bit to just not give him an emoji. It looks like you got added and EMAC got added. What is up, guys? You got yourselves an early live before lock show today for the early slate, a 4-gamer to kick off this day for you guys, especially if you're like me on the West Coast. We're going to talk about everything you need to know for the slate. I'm Chris Spags, joined by a man who's well-equipped, who's bright and peppy here to make up for my lack of sleep and general joy in life. You know him. You love him. He's got his own emoji now. He's nerd-ass Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
It's very exciting, other than the fact that since I am not a YouTube member myself, I can't actually use my own emoji. But yeah, I could definitely get excited when I see other people post it.
Yeah, I think it's funny. Like, I appreciate our staff and their enthusiasm for the emoji game. I'm not going to pay the place I work to use an emoji of myself. I think that just feels like a bridge too far for me. But you guys can do that. So make sure you hit that join button underneath the video if you're watching on the desktop version of YouTube. That is the way you can join the Awesemo channel, get a little more recognition. Guys like Brian Claremont, you can see him better in chat, can see your chats better. You can also play with the emojis. You can have a lot of fun trolling us or whatever you want to do on there. But just a good way to support the community here and get a little more recognition for yourself. So hit that join button on the channel right now. And also let's make sure that you're going over to our Awesemo_com Twitter handle right now. Big giveaway going on for the NFL draft on our pin tweet. You win a year of Awesemo Plus by doing the little guessing game on there. It's the usual thing we do with the giveaways. You got to do your guessing, do a little retweet action, following action, all that stuff. But it's very simple on there. So check the pin tweet at Awesemo_com. Do some draft picks for yourself, and then maybe win a free year of Awesemo Plus. Doesn't get any easier for that. Greg, let's talk about the slate, though. Give me your overview, because we have one pitcher people may not be familiar with on the slate. We are going to have Shane McClanahan making his, looks like major league debut, unless I'm missing something here. But last time he pitched a few games in the spring training time for the Rays, and has not pitched besides that since 2019. But that's the one observation I have here. What are you viewing on the slate as being unique or interesting for a 4-gamer?
So he actually pitched in the postseason last year, I believe.
I didn't know that.
But yeah, it's really hard to know what to make of him, right? Because I mean, you look at him on Fangraphs, and he is, I think they had him ranked as like the 117th best prospect in baseball. So there's some sort of background in him. Yeah, he's overall ranked 9th in the Rays organization, 117th best prospect overall. There's no data on him though, right? Because especially the way that the minor leagues were handled last year, we saw him make a few relief appearances last year in the playoffs. But beyond that, I don't know what to expect from him today. Maybe he's really good with a lot of strikeout upside. He's shown pretty good strikeout numbers in the minor leagues from what we've seen of him in 2019 in Double-A, 10.31 strikeouts per 9 innings. In A-ball, 10.76 strikeouts per 9 innings. So like there have been good strikeout numbers there. It's just this is old data, and maybe he's really good, maybe he isn't. But at least for GPP standpoint, he's not on the Fanduel slate. He is on Draftkings. It seems like something I want to have both sides of.
Yeah, definitely going to be a player that's very cheap, and unknown how deep he'll be pitching into this game, but a 13 fantasy point projection from Awesemo today for Shane McClanahan. So interesting spot for him. And as Greg mentioned, the minor league numbers there, I had him at 11.8 strikeouts per 9 throughout his entire minor league career. But that's a number that probably going to drop a little bit here in the majors, but going against an Oakland team that does have some strikeouts, maybe a guy I can get to today. We'll talk about it here. We're going to go game by game here because it is a 4-game slate that's not been hit on anywhere. So hit that like button, guys. And of course, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We have MLB content all day long, including the MLB Deeper Dive coming up at 12 p.m. Pacific time, 3 p.m. East Coast time today with Greg. Aiton is going to be on the show, not Michael. It is going to be, in fact, Aiton, Alex, and Gundacker making the MLB Deeper Dive go for the next 2 days to close out the week. And I just want to point out, this is a normal human being who exists now at the Awesemo channel, Greg, after you derided me so for being a week off on my one-stop shop reading.
By the way, so right now, like, you're turning this on me as if you didn't call him Michael. right?
I called him Aiton. I said Aiton the entire time. I didn't say Michael. There's no Michaels here.
This is secondhand information. I wasn't actually watching at the time, but Terry had said that you said it was Michael. I was like, I don't know who this Michael guy
I say
is.
the right names. It's funny because like this is why it was so frustrating that you're like, oh, Michael, and I was like, I literally watched the show he did that morning to figure out how to pronounce his name because like I see Eytan. I'm like, I don't know. Oh, Aton is what? No, he said Aiton. Aton. What?
And you're still wrong. And you're still wrong. And by the way, also, so he has a radio show he does in Philly that I went on as a guest 2 years ago. He's not going to remember that. I have a good memory, so I like vaguely remember. But I didn't remember how to pronounce his name. I definitely didn't call him Michael. But either way, I didn't really. It took me a second to put two and two together, and I realized that I have worked with him before in the past as a guest on his radio show. So yeah, that's going to catch him by surprise. Where he's like, "Nice to meet you." I'm like, we've met before.
Well, he's Aiton to me. I don't know. That's or A-Town, I guess. Apparently, representing Atlanta is what that name pronunciation sounds like. But yeah, Aiton, one of the new names you're gonna find here on the channel, doing the deeper dive today and tomorrow. Today with Alex and Gundacker. So watch that show here, and you get me on the deeper dive. I believe Mondays through Wednesdays is going to be the schedule. But let's talk about some of these games here, Greg. Let's get into the first one. We got another Yankee stack slate going against Jorge Lopez again, which I feel like this matchup already happened 2 days ago, but I might be completely just Alzheimer's in my old age here, but it does seem like a spot. The Yankees 5.1 implied runs going against Jorge Lopez, a pitcher who has not had a lot to offer in the majors, going back to 2019, a 19.4% K rate, 5% on run rate. The velocity is pretty good, 94 miles per hour on his fastball, which has stayed flat over the course of the last couple seasons. But besides that, Greg, not a great pitcher, not a guy who has anything noteworthy here, I guess, other than the fact that over the last season and change, been limiting hard contact fairly well. But it's a pretty warm day for Baltimore Stadium today, 82 degrees. I feel like overall that puts me on the Yankees about as much as one can be relative to the fact that they are also going to be overowned as they are every single day as a top stack.
Yeah, and being off them had worked pretty much every day until yesterday. But even with that said, there was other teams that outscored the Yankees yesterday. It's not like they were a necessary stack to have. I had a fairly decent baseball slate yesterday. It could have been really good if Weathers didn't get hurt 1 inning into his start, literally threw 2 pitches, and the trainer came out to see him. I was like, oh, that's no good. And then he finished the inning with his velocity way down, and he didn't start the second inning. I was like, well, all right, at least I didn't get 0 from Rodon like I thought I was going to before. But anyway, Jorge Lopez, he has made 1 start against the Yankees this year. He threw 4 2/3 innings, gave up 4 earned runs in that start. Overall, his numbers for the year are really not impressive, but like you said, it just comes down to the fact of, in terms of stacking the Yankees, by the way, a 4-game slate, this isn't going to be like other slates where I don't want anything to do with the Yankees because they're way negatively leveraged. It's just, I'm going to have less than them than the field does. On Draftkings, we have them with a 28% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate. They have a 35% ownership share. Fanduel, it's kind of something similar where we have them with a, let's see, it would have been easier if I would have pulled up the Fanduel and Draftkings things on separate tabs, but 27% chance being the top scoring team on slate and also 35% ownership share on Fanduel. So I have lineups there. I'm playing on Fanduel and Draftkings. I'm going to have exposure to the Yankees, but I'm going to be pretty heavily underweight to the field just based on how negatively leveraged they are.
So this is something that we've talked about recently on some of the deeper dive shows with Alex, and Alex is going to be a fixture on those MLB deeper dive shows. So make sure you're watching that because you are getting information straight from one of the best players in DFS. And honestly, that is going to be a big asset for MLB in particular. That's a lot about the rigor and the process of it all. And just, being smart about your exposure is really more than any other sport where it's all about just playing the outcomes more than anything. And Alex this week on a couple of the shows advocated for just not playing the Yankees, or at least for him was not going to play the Yankees. And it ended up working out, I think, more often than not for him, at least in terms of his overall lineup construction. But Greg, I'm just going to talk to you here because that was a 10-game slate, a 13-game slate. And you mentioned here, this is a 4-gamer where I agree with you. I think you have to get some Yankees exposure. They wouldn't be a team I would omit from the player pool like you can on a 10-game or a 13-gamer, especially in a spot where Baltimore is going to have a warmer day. The park has always been playing pretty well for power. Lopez himself giving up that 5% on run rate is a pretty powerful number to be giving up to the Yankees here. So I guess the question I would have, is there anything you're doing to get different here? Because we're going to say that for a short slate, you can't take them out of your player pool. So that's one thing that you are approaching, but are you getting more of like Clint Frazier or Brent Gardner at the bottom of the order just to try to drop that ownership product a little bit?
I mean, so what I'm doing differently isn't that I am just totally outright fading or making like weird Yankee stacks. I just have a lot less Yankee stacks in the field. And so if they do happen to go off, it's like, hey, I have some exposure to them. I think they have a lot of upside, but it's hard to get that different on a 4-game slate when you're stacking the Yankees when they're this popular. So, I mean, what really differentiates my lineups is just that I have a lot less shares of the Yankees. And I mean, I guess I have a few lineups with them that don't have Nola as the pitcher. Nola is overall my most exposed player on the slate, but it's not like I'm 100% on him or anything like that. So that's probably the way that my Yankees, some of the Yankee stocks are most different, is that some of them don't have Nola. And the other thing too is just I have less Yankee stacks than the field has.
Yeah, I think that seems like a reasonable way to handle it. I personally wouldn't mind the idea of just trying to take away and some of your stacks, getting away from maybe actually, all these guys are so highly owned. It's really hard to advocate for one, but Rougned Odor is a guy we've beaten up a lot on the deeper dive recently, talking about his ownership just being outlandish today on DraftKings. Projects for just under 40% ownership. Gleyber Torres projects for over 40% ownership, and his power numbers we've talked about on a bunch of the shows recently since 2020, down to a 0.095 ISO. I don't know what's going on with him, but I do think, to me, omitting Torres, omitting Rougned Odor would be two plays, or at least getting less of them and going more to Gardner, going more to Frazier, guys who have pop at the bottom of the order. And I know that people don't love playing bottom of the order guys, but I think with the Yankees, it is a bit different because Frazier has a 213 ISO, Gardner has a 250 ISO versus righties, and they are going against Jorge Lopez, who gives up a lot of power. So that's something I wouldn't mind here, but Greg's approach, another way you can go. Are you getting any Jorge Lopez at all? Short slate. Feel like I have to ask the question because he's cheap, and just playing against the Yankees, somehow having a bad day seems like one way to get a lot of leverage on the field.
Let's see. My lineups are rerunning right now, and I have 2% Jorge Lopez. So the answer is not really. I guess that's exactly what the field has, and I might not even have him at all when I rerun the lineups. I'm waiting for the Houston Astros lineup to come out before I rerun my final lineups, because I know that there's going to be, especially for day games, guys always end up getting rested, and it's going to be like, hey, the Astros lineup's going to come up and I'm going to have the wrong players in, and I'm going to just have to rerun it anyway. So I'm waiting on that to do one final run of it. But I assume that if I get to any Jorge Lopez, it's just going to be one or two lineups. Like I get the leverage there, but there's still other cheap pitchers that I'm going to prefer more than him.
Yeah, with Lopez, you're not, I think, expecting a big strikeout day given his 18% K rate. It's facing a Yankees team with 5 guys to strike out above league average, a 23.4% aggregate K rate for him. So I think really the hope, if you do play Jorge Lopez, that he hangs it long enough and just survives when he pitches 4 or 5 innings of no runs given up or just 1 home run. But it's not a great day for him. I think if you are playing Jorge Lopez, you're banking on really all the rest of the pitchers being terrible. So that's the approach I would look at. We do have Jordan Montgomery on the other side. His price tag is coming up a bit. Over the last season, it's been about a 25% K rate, going back to 2019, where he faced a few more batters as well. Still a 25% K rate. 3.7 xFIP, not the worst number either for Jordan Montgomery, but the strikeout number is not overpowering by any stretch. The power numbers he's given up also a little bit concerning, getting particularly hit hard by righties, a 236 ISO allowed by him. And I guess, are you feeling anything particular for Jordan Montgomery? The field's going to be owning him 30%. Like, as a symptom of it being a 4-game slate, I don't mind being around that, but I just don't have the highest confidence of Jordan Montgomery, even on a short slate.
Yeah, he is picking up way too much ownership for me. I'm pretty significantly underweight to the field on him right now. And it's really, number one, he's 8,800 on DraftKings. And then on Fanduel, I think he's a little more reasonable at 8,100 for a single pitcher slate. But still, we only need to roster one pitcher. So him at 14% ownership on Fanduel, that's also a number that I'm underweight to the field on. So, I mean, with Montgomery, it's also, he's really expensive at that salary. And we've seen him often not work all that deep into games. So far this year, he hasn't gone past 6 innings. And that's something we've generally seen from him in the past, too. The Yankees typically have a pretty quick hook with him. And he's struggled with his command a little bit as of late. Last 3 starts, 3 walks, 2 walks, 2 walks. So that's something else that's run his pitch count up, where even though he's only pitching 4 or 5 innings, when you're walking that many guys, it kind of makes it harder to work that deep into games. And then we look at our leverage tools, and Baltimore looks like they're one of the most under-owned offenses for this short slate. There's a positive leverage on them, both FanDuel and DraftKings. So I have a very, very limited amount of exposure to Montgomery, much less than the field, and I'm actually overweight to the Baltimore stacks on the other side. I think they are a good lower-owned team to stack up.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable approach. You're not the best implied total for Baltimore, 3.9 implied runs, but you do have a better chance of being the top value stack. And as Greg mentioned, they do have higher top stack odds in their ownership currently. So that is something to look at for Baltimore. And again, Montgomery does give up a good amount of power against the righties in particular. The righty splits have been pretty egregious, still getting some strikeouts with them, but a 5.5% home run rate compared to no home runs given up to lefties. Granted, only faced 80 lefties compared to 220 righties. But to me, it does mean that there are a lot of ways that this Baltimore lineup can get to him, with a bunch of righties coming after Cedric Mullins. And are there any hitters for Baltimore you'd particularly prioritize? I do think Mullins hitting in the leadoff spot, even though Montgomery's had some success against lefties, he's only going to be under 3% owned, and he is hitting leadoff. And we have seen him have perhaps surprising power recently in a way that I don't mind going there. But I feel like it's got to be more of a Mancini, Franco, Severino, Baltimore stack for me, just with the power numbers. Are there any Orioles who really stand out for you in a meaningful way if you are going to stack them up?
Severino's the one I have the most exposure to right now in stacks, and also outside of stacks. He's a catcher who's always hit left-handed pitching really, really well. He's hitting fifth for them, so he's in a good lineup spot. Also, 3,400 on DraftKings. That's a really favorable price tag. I don't have as much exposure to him on Fanduel right now just because there isn't a need to force a catcher in. But on DraftKings, where we have to play a catcher, and he's at 3,400, and he's one of the only catchers that I think is reliable home run upside and also has too cheap of a price on the slate. So Pedro Severino is my priority play from the Orioles.
I know this is a bit of a small sample size for this guy, but has there ever been a more disappointing power player with the name Ryan Mountcastle? Like, I feel like that's the sign of like a man who should be 6'7" and bashing about 70 home runs a year. And here he is, 107 ISO versus lefties so far. And that has not been the case for him in the majors thus far.
Yeah, he should have been one of those guys in Game of Thrones, wielding like one of those big, like spiky hammers or something that hits guys and their heads blow up. But instead, let's see, what are his measurements? What's like his height?
I feel like he's a big guy, if I'm remembering correctly, but I might just be because of the name Mountcastle.
He's 6'3". Boy, he looks very pouty in this picture of him.
See, this is what the tough part when we don't have the producer doing it on the screen. Poor Chris was not prepared to look up Ryan Mountcastle, but I'm going to look him up right now just so we could see. Oh, are you looking at the one of him in the camo outfit?
Yeah, he does not. He does not look thrilled to be wherever he is right there.
I mean, it does seem like a solemn moment for the national anthem, and he's wearing camo, so perhaps his patriotism got the better of him. But
maybe honestly, he's wearing. Yeah. No, I think he's just wearing camo, and he thought nobody could see him, and he's like, "Oh, I could just be unhappy right now. Nobody will know."
They're like, "Oh, who's that floating head there? Why does he look so sad?" Ryan Mountcastle, though, yeah, the numbers have not been impressive for him thus far. So keep that in mind if you are going to play him on the assumption that he is a gigantic mountain of muscle who is going to hit home runs. He has not quite done that so far yet. Let's keep going through here, and guys, smash that like button here. We appreciate all the regulars in chat. Greg S.J., one of our VIPs, even though he not joining the Awesemo family with the green coloring for himself and emoji access. But Greg, one of the regulars, we appreciate a bunch, and it doesn't matter if you're a member of the channel or not. We appreciate all you guys for being in chat. So hit that like button, and of course, subscribe to the channel as well so you can see all the content that we have going on all day long. Also, one interesting tweet from Larry C. Saying that McClanahan says he's been stretched out to 4 to 5 innings and will be on regular rest for his start Thursday versus Oakland. So one thing to discuss here next coming up for Shane McClanahan, because we're going to talk about Oakland getting 4 implied runs against the aforementioned Shane McClanahan, a cheap pitcher who we talked about earlier in the show. It's at about 11.8 strikeouts per 9 in the minors. And obviously those numbers are going to come down a little bit, but for comparison's sake, this year, you have Jacob deGrom averaging 15 strikeouts per 9 in the majors. So that's just a metric to throw out there, I guess, is that's a really good pitcher in the majors. McClanahan, you're going to expect to be a little bit less or significantly less than that. But McClanahan, at his price point, decent projection. It is a short slate, Greg. So I have no issue with the 25%-ish ownership that's going to be going to McClanahan today.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before at the top of the show when we were briefly discussing him, like I don't know how anybody can really know what to expect from him. We don't have a look at any significant minor league numbers for him. There was no minor league numbers that were recorded last year. He's a somewhat fairly well-regarded prospect, at least his outlook. It looks like that if he does end up being a good big league pitcher, it's also going to be very favorable for fantasy production because he struck out, well over a hitter per inning during his time in the minor leagues. But then there's also a question of how deep is he going to work into the game? Like you said, like we hear that he's stretched out to 4 or 5 innings. Does that mean he's actually going to be allowed to work 4 or 5 innings? How quick is the hook going to be with him? Is he going to get nervous? Because we've seen this a lot before too with pitchers making their debuts where they just can't find the strike zone in the first inning. So to me, I think this is a good game to play both sides of. For DraftKings, FanDuel, McClanahan isn't in the player pool, so we could only stack up the A's. But the A's are one of my favorite stacks on the slate when we consider their current ownership right now on FanDuel and DraftKings. They're looking like the one of the most positively leveraged teams on the slate. So they're a very high priority stack for me. And I'm hoping that that maybe McClanahan's either nervous or if he pitches well, at least for DraftKings purposes, he strikes out a bunch of guys when he's on the slate. So I view it as a very high variance situation.
Yeah, I agree. And we talk about that a lot with MLB in particular, where there are some pitchers who have positive things going for them in terms of their strikeout numbers or their ability just to avoid hard contact, those kind of things. But sometimes there are guys where you have the strikeout numbers and they might give up some power. And going against Oakland, definitely going to be a spot that has a lot of power in their lineup. relative to the slate, a 177 aggregate ISO for the projected lineup is one of the better marks that we're going to see today. So going against McClanahan, I would agree. It makes sense to play some McClanahan to me. Makes some sense to play some Oakland. But really, either way, would not be surprised to see either McClanahan have an outlier effort or Oakland have an outlier effort relative to a 4-game slate. Oakland's hitters, though, Greg, who are you prioritizing here? Because you mentioned it, they are deeply underowned according to the top stacks tool. And it does seem like there are a lot of ways you can go, including top of the order guys for the most part, like Laureano, Jed Lowry. Well, I know you've mentioned before as being an Oakland A that you like to get to more, but his numbers have been a little bit less power heavy, but he's getting on base pretty well. And actually over the last season, since he actually started playing meaningful run for Oakland, up to a 181 ISO rate for him, which is pretty surprising to see from Jed Lowry. So lots of ways you can go for Oakland, Greg, but who are your priorities?
Yeah, and I'm actually going to have to rerun everything in a second anyway, because we just got the Houston Astros lineup and they were missing some key guys, which I kind of figured was going to be the case. I just didn't know which key guys it was going to be. But Kyle Tucker not being in the lineup and Michael Brantley, that's going to change a lot of my ownerships a lot. But at least for the A's, you mentioned Jed Lowry. He's right now a core piece in my lineups. Matt Chapman is coming up in a lot of my A's stacks. And then Amar Khanna, who's played pretty well at times as a chalk play, but he's been really high variance. Like if you look at his last 5 starts, 15 fantasy points, 20, then 2, 3, and 5. So boomer bust play has kind of been all over the place, but that also indicates to me that if the A's have a big game, more often than not, he's definitely been someone who's been involved in the mix. So for A's stacks, he's a lot of them for me.
Also, that Astros lineup, Chas McCormick back on the slate. Thank God we went so long without more Chas.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, nobody really knows what his name is, right? Like we call him Chaz because that's what's written in draft, but in Fantasy Cruncher, it's what's written on Draftkings. But he goes by many names. Sometimes he's Chad, sometimes he's Chris. We've called him many different names, and he's never corrected me, so I assume he enjoys it.
I think Chaz comes from the root Charles. He would be a better baseball player if his name were Chuck McCormick. I think we can all agree there, but it's fine. It's his choice. He can choose whatever he wants to do with his name. Oakland, the rest of the team here, we do have some guys. Crap. I messed up my my spreadsheet like Zoom level, and now I don't know how to get it back, and it's all deeply upsetting for me. But Oakland,
is it too big or is it too big or too small?
It's too big, which that's what she said, Greg. That's the issue. But I zoomed in accidentally and then was trying to change the percentage and somehow changed a Kwang Hyun Kim's salary. So there's a lot of issues for me in my sheet, but got it back now. Oakland's bottom of the lineup here. Any interest in those guys? You have Piscotty hitting 2,700 on DraftKings in the 7 hole. You have Elvis Andrus hitting 8 hole 3K. Do any of these guys seem even worth getting exposure to, or is the rest of the Oakland stack just low owned enough that you're not even looking at the bottom of the order?
Yeah, nobody at the bottom of the order is high priority for me. Like a couple of them get mixed into stacks here and there, Piscotty's in a few of them, but nobody that's I'm getting to a ton. It's most of the top of the order guys. And like you said, also the ownership on the stack is so low relative to this being a 4-game slate that I don't think we really have to dig too deep at the bottom of the A's lineup to try to differentiate, because just playing them in itself is already differentiating.
Yep, I think that makes enough sense to me. Let's go to the Tampa Bay side. Chris Bassett going against them today, and Bassett's price tag, pretty lofty, decent projection on him. He's going against Tampa Bay lineup that does have a 26% aggregate K rate in their lineup today. 6 guys that strike out above league average, and I'm normally not the biggest Chris Bassett guy, other than the fact that he does pitch in a park that for the most part is going to be beneficial. Today he's pitching in another one that's going to be beneficial for him as well, and I think that's really the main reason I don't mind going to Bassett today. Aaron Nola is going to be the chalk pitcher on the slate. That's fine to me. But Bassett, a guy who I think is not bad either, not the best strikeout stuff by any stretch either. 22.4% K rate going back to 2019 over the last season, plus 21.4% K rate, but only a 2.1% on run rate. I feel like that's the main thing I would be looking at here, where wouldn't shock me to see Bassett pitched his usual 5.5 innings, maybe up to 6, and him just getting results, hanging in there, not giving up home runs, I think is enough to go to Bassett on the slate, Greg. But how are you feeling about him, given the fact that he will be about a third of the field owning him?
Way too popular for me and also too expensive. So he's good enough to where I don't really want to stack the Rays. They're the team I have the least amount of exposure to right now as a stack. But at the same time, too, the Rays are good enough and Bass is expensive enough and high owned enough to where if I have the salary and I'm paying him for a pitcher, Aaron Nola is a much higher priority for me than Chris Bassett. So this is a spot where I have the least amount of interest in on the slate on the offense and the pitching end.
Okay. So yeah, that's a reasonable approach too. Bassett, to me, the thing that really pops out is Awesemo's projection for him. And on the slate where really nobody is going to stand out meaningfully, I guess, besides Aaron Nola, Bassett, about a 2x value projection for him from Awesemo, a little bit less than that, I think is playable to me, but going to be chalky as everybody's going to be for the most part on the slate. So keep that in mind. You mentioned not a lot of interest in the race stack, but they are going to be pretty highly owned, especially Kevin Kiermaier hitting the leadoff spot, $2,200 on DraftKings, going to be a very chalky play today. I just have to say, even if you're playing the Rays or not really, I feel like not playing Kiermaier would be a move that I have no issue with at all today. A quarter of the field being on the guy just because he's cheap. That tends to be the kind of guys we really try to avoid, Greg, unless you feel differently.
I just find it weird that the Rays as a whole are, relatively popular. And there's obviously a step back from the Yankees, right? The Yankees pick up so much more ownership than everybody else. But then we have the Astros, the Mariners, the Rays, and the Phillies all kind of grouped together. But I find it weird that the Rays are picking up this much ownership when Bassett's also picking up that much ownership. It doesn't make that much sense to me, especially when I don't consider either to be that much of an upside spot, right? I think Bassett's a good enough pitcher. They should be able to suppress a ton of the Rays from having a ton of production, where at the same time also, I think the Rays are a good enough offense, but I don't expect Bassett to reliably be able to outscore Aaron Nola, even though they kind of have comparable ownerships relative to what I would have expected coming into the slate. So, I mean, to me, this is just a situation that I don't really want that much to do with relative to what the ownership is. I'm going to be I don't think you could play 0% Chris Bassett, but I have much, much less than the field does right now.
I think the thing with the Tampa Bay stack is it's really three guys driving the ownership, it looks like, with Kiermaier being at 25% owned on DK. And we'll do money time coming up in 4 minutes here. So I'll flip the hat. We'll talk about the top 5 owned players on DraftKings and FanDuel. Brandon Lau picking up 14% ownership. Austin Meadows picking up 17. And then nobody else on Tampa Bay is picking up over 5% ownership, I guess, besides Joey Wendell, but everybody else under 5. Wendell's under 6. So if you wanted to stack Tampa Bay, I mean, obviously not playing some of these guys like Meadows and Lau is going to be suboptimal because they're the best hitters in the lineup. But I do think not playing Kiermaier, if you want to stack up the rest of the Rays, would be just the approach I would take here, because it's a much lower owned stack if you take out Kiermaier. That's something we were talking about with Awesemo the other day in the deeper dive with Fernando Tatis, where that's a situation where, yeah, the Padres, you take out Tatis, it's not the best part because you're missing one of the best hitters in the lineup. This one, you're taking out Kiermaier and you're dropping the ownership overall by a lot, and you're just missing out on a guy who kind of sucks and is hitting in leadoff at 2,200. So that's one way to get different the Rays if you do want to play him, but I would be more on the Bassett side if I had to choose. Any final thoughts here on the Rays? I feel like we got to stretch for 2 more minutes because we got to fill this hour.
Let me see if I could even.
What do you think about Tampa in general?
I used to. So this is a real thing. I used to go to Tampa all the time for spring training when I was a kid. Back when when I used to have sports allegiances, before I just bet on everything. It was like, I just like whoever I bet on tonight, right? There was a point in time where I was a regular fan like everybody else. And that was nice. My dad, my brothers would all go to Yankee spring training. That was in Tampa Bay. We'd go to that terrible ballpark and watch baseball.
Yeah, so the St. Petersburg, Tampa area, I believe, known for both spring training and I believe the largest strip club in America is there. So a place that I'm sure James Harden would be no stranger to, playing the Raptors during the pandemic.
Is that the biggest? Like,
yeah, the Mons. That's
Chris. Oh wow! Well, producer Chris knew the name of the strip club very quickly.
But that is the one that is supposed to be the largest in America, unless that's changed. I don't keep up with my strip club square footage rankings that much, but I do know from when I was down there for a bachelor party at one point, or for a friend's wedding actually in Sarasota. I remember people saying that was the largest, and then confirmed that on Google. So there you go. For all your gigantic strip club needs, head to Tampa. Let's do money time here before we get into the back half of the game. So let's flip the hat. We'll do Awesemo Hall of Fame too. We got all the good stuff here on the early live before lock show. Thank you for the cash register sound effect. Oh no, okay. But Butthole Jenkins, not happy to see Butthole Jenkins having some problems. But one of our luminaries I mentioned on the tip off yesterday, we're regulars in chat, Butthole Jenkins. But we appreciate all of you guys, no matter how silly your name is, and hope you're doing all right, Butthole. It's a silly sentence to say, but I do want to express my hope and prayers for our boy Butthole. Top 5 plays on DraftKings. It's money time. Aaron Nola, number 1, 54%. Number 2, Chris Bassett, up to 44% now. Number 3, Giancarlo Stanton, 41%. Number 4, Gleyber Torres, 40%. And number 5, Kwang Hyun Kim, 38% on Draftkings. On Fanduel, their top fives: Giancarlo Stanton, number 1 at 54%. Number 2, Gleyber Torres, again, 49%. Number 3, Aaron Nola at 47%. Number 4, Carlos Correa at 46%. And number 5, Alex Bregman at 44%. So you can always get all the ownership projections for yourself at awesemo.com/join. There's a little preview of them. And then let's do the Hall of Fame, Chris, if you've got that handy for us to go dig through the... Where the fuck that link go? Well, let's see. I'm sure if I type in Awesemo HOF, it's going to come up with the slides. Boop, boop, boop. Okay, there we go. Awesemo Hall of Fame. I got it. We got the first one up here is going to be, I got to zoom in to John Don. Decided to do this full time recently, and after winning a couple MLB slates this week, decided to go in on a smaller NBA one to see where he's at, and he gave the shout out to the Awesemo NBA tools. Nice NBA win for him. A full-time DFS. Greg, how are you feeling about seeing that from one of the audience? I feel like that's always a tough one to recommend for anybody, but happy for anybody who could make that leap.
Yeah, I mean, there was a point in time where I first quit my 9-to-5 sales job, and I was like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to play DFS full time. Then I ended up getting into content and stuff too. But yeah, it could be, there's definitely some ups and downs, a little stress. I get a lot of questions from people on Twitter. That's one of the most popular DMs I get, other than just people saying, should I play this guy or this guy? A lot of people DM me and they say like, hey, should I go play DFS full time? And I never know, like, there's never enough information to answer that question. It's like, I don't know your financial situation. I don't know how much money you make playing DFS. Some people tell me they want to play DFS full time, and then they tell me they don't even make money playing DFS, which that seems like a suboptimal decision. But yeah, there's a lot that goes into making that kind of decision, but congrats to anybody who's making it work.
Yeah, bankroll management can be very important if you do try to do it full time, and maybe get yourself a show. Just balance out some of your losings on the various days, the swings that come with it all. But congrats to everybody out there who's having success, including John Don. Christopher Perello, best MLB lineup he's ever made. 3 small MLB banks and counting. $75 wins. We were just happy to see those, the $10,000, $100,000 wins, because honestly, for this guy, for Christopher Perello, a fellow Chris, this could mean more to him than it does to see somebody like, no disrespect to Rinpack, obviously, but Rinpack wins $100,000 every night. It's nice to see a guy who's just getting his feet wet do well here. That's what we want to see at Awesemo HOF. So tweet the handle with any wins you have on there, and make sure you have that Awesemo avatar, because if you do finish in the top 3 in a tournament with 5,000 or more people in it, you get a free month of Awesemo Plus. So lots of benefits to everybody for that one. Some other wins here from our own Jake Hari. Good to see Jake. He's not currently doing MLB shows, too busy in the NHL world, apparently too busy making mints of money for himself here. Tommy Nation won Jake's handle if you ever see him on the hockey streets on there, but 2 big wins for him. Shout out to our boy Jake. Hope to see him soon on some MLB shows. Our own Pete the Heat here, also in the Hall of Fame. Greg, all these, I feel like I'm being pranked here with all the talent, all of our hosts always getting these screenshots here, being inducted into the Hall of Fame. And I don't know if you've been in the Hall of Fame yet, Greg. Awesemo's been in there. It seems like Pete now's in there. Jake's in there. I feel like we have to start submitting our own screenshots.
Yeah, here's the deal. Like, to me, I don't want to submit myself into the Hall of Fame. Like, to me, like, I can't. I wouldn't be able to handle it. Somebody submitted me, though. They saw me win a tournament, and they screenshotted it, and they sent it to the Awesemo Hall of Fame. I was like, can we not do that? But whatever. It's definitely better than not winning money.
The Greg stands, always known for showing up for his Hall of Fame indoctrinations. And the last one here, Kampachi Zaraki, saying, only playing NASCAR for about a month. I got his first win this weekend. Thanks to everything Awesemo_com provides. And you can see there some of the wins in NASCAR, really every sport out there. If you're trying to play, if you just want some more action for DFS in your life, you can use the top drivers tool for NASCAR, the top fighters tool for MMA. Lots of different ways to use that stuff and get your own spot in the Awesemo Hall of Fame, your own Awesemo Hall of Fame jacket. I don't even know what that would look like. What would the color be? I guess the Awesemo logo, a teal and yellow, perhaps with streaking lines all over it. Honestly, it would be something I'd wear on a show. So if we do make a Hall of Fame jacket, feel free to throw it to me. Let's keep going through here. We got 2 more games on the slate, and let's talk about Philadelphia. 3.5 implied runs against Kwang Hyun Kim, another pitcher here who has been looking pretty good in the majors so far, at least in terms of the results. Some underlying numbers that don't seem the best. 19% K rate for him. Velocity for him has been under 90. Not missing bats terribly well, only an 8.7% swing strike rate. And Greg, I feel like going against Kwang Hyun Kim would be a result that I would like to chase today for Philadelphia. They do seem a little bit overowned according to the top sacks tool, but I'm not buying the underlying numbers here for Kwang Hyun Kim.
All right, so here's what I like about Kwang Hyun Kim, at least for DraftKings as an SP2. One, he's really cheap, and also Bryce Harper's out today. He's dealing with, they said it's a face injury. I don't know what that means, but he's out because of face. So where it's like Bryce Harper, because I saw the DK Live that they put out the tweets and like the injury, and there was like, Bryce Harper face is out today. So no Bryce Harper. And he's been a really big part of the Phillies offense, as would be expected. But without him in there, this is a boost to Kim, and it's not accounted for in the pricing. So it's kind of a similar situation that we would see in NBA, although not quite to the same extent. But when you see somebody who's, a backup that's all of a sudden picking up more usage, or is all of a sudden put in a role where they're going to play more minutes, there aren't that many situations that exist for baseball. But somebody like a pitcher facing the Phillies without Bryce Harper, that kind of is one of those situations. So just because of that, I think Kim is still way underpriced, and he actually is the pitcher that I have the second most exposure to on DraftKings right now.
Also, Chris and the YouTube chat pointing out that it was, in fact, that he got hit in the face by a ball yesterday. I think Chris has a 90-mile-per-hour sinker. Somebody in the chat's like a 95-mile-per-hour fastball. I know that because I saw the ESPN headline about it. Did not see that live. But, yeah, shot to the face. It was not, in fact, a dad joke about how his face was hurting him. And then it's like, no, because it's killing me.
Yeah, it's a face injury. It's exactly what I said. He's out with a face injury.
No, I mean, I just feel like you were ambiguous about it. Like, oh, maybe he got Botox or something. He got smacked in the face by a fastball.
It's a face injury. His face hurts. He's not playing today.
His face does hurt, so he is not playing today. And maybe he comes out with one of those fun face masks that we get in the NBA sometimes. I think Robert Covington's been wearing one the most recently that I can recall. But we'll see what happens with Bryce Harper coming back. But he's not in the lineup today. You do get Alec Boehm, the 2-hole, Rhys Hoskins in the 3-hole. And I do feel like those guys, to me, like I know you're saying that it does get weaker, and I agree it is a weaker lineup overall without Bryce Harper. But you still have guys who've been hitting lefties pretty well. Like Boehm's rates against lefties, not the biggest sample size by any stretch, only 66 batters faced, but he's at a 304 ISO. Hoskins has a much bigger sample size, 328 ISO for him going against lefties. I just think this is a spot where Kwang Hyun Kim just kind of comes back down to earth, because I don't think his home run rate should be as low as it is. I don't think his other numbers should be as low as they are. Getting good amount of hard contact too. I guess he's been keeping the fly balls down for the most part, only at 30% fly ball rate, but I would just be more of a believer in Philadelphia here. And Alec Boehm being under 5% owned on DK to me, although actually I need to update the ownership from the most recent run we had. But if he's going to be that low owned, hitting pretty high up in the order with good splits, I feel like Boehm to me would be one of the more undervalued plays on the slate.
All right. So let me ask you this question then in this vein. Who do you think, because we're going to agree and talk about him again. Aaron Nola, we're going to talk about him a second on the other side. Again, clearly the best starting pitcher option on the slate. I think he's also going way under-owned relative to what the other options are. To me, I think the easiest player to get overweight to the field on and be plus EV for this slate is Aaron Nola. But as an SP2, who do you think is the best option if you don't think it's Kim then? Because that's one of the main reasons I like him as an SP2. I just don't like the other options, and there's just reason to think he's value with him being cheap and Bryce Harper not being in the lineup.
Like, I don't have any issue getting a little bit of Kim. I think I might be more inclined to take my lot with McClanahan, though I guess McClanahan is going to be about twice as owned, it looks like. So that does seem like a bit of a concern. Kwang Hyun Kim only going to be 11% owned on DK in the most recent run. I don't know. I just think to me, it's a low implied total, so I get it. I just don't love that he's not really blowing guys away with anything, and he's getting results as though he has been blowing guys away, like a 213 batting average, a 250 BABIP when you only have a 19% K rate and a 9% swing strike rate. There could be something underlying I'm missing with his pitch mix, but I just think his numbers to me jump out as a guy who's gotten a little bit lucky so far. And I do try to target those guys more. So I think McClanahan just getting in the hopes that he doesn't. It's funny because you were like, I hope that McClanahan's nervous. I hope McClanahan has that first start where it's like, oh, cool, they don't know what he's throwing yet, and he's going to be really good and get a bunch of strikeouts in 4 or 5 innings. I think that's what I would play in a little more. Whereas, Kim now has faced 190 batters. So a little more tape on him. And I think some more ways that Philly could get to him.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm overweight on McClanahan also, but I just have more exposure to Kwang Hyun Kim right now.
I think it's a reasonable take. And I think this is one where, honestly, it's two different ways to play it. I think saving the money and going to McClanahan would be a move that I don't mind, just because I do think the strikeout stuff is going to be there a little bit more. But Kim is facing a lineup today that does have 4 guys that strike out above league average, a little bit weaker, as Greg mentioned, with no Bryce Harper. So you won't get an argument for me. I just do like the Philly stack a little bit more. If you were stacking Phillies, though, does anybody jump out as a priority? Because it is a weird ownership for Philly where the top 4 are all going to be owned. And I guess Boehm is now up to 9%, still under owned, I think, compared to what his potential is today. But no ownership at all going to Udubel Herrera, going to Scott Kingery, going to Roman Quinn. These guys are going to be completely unrecognized on the slate. Do you have any interest in them at all?
So let's see. Who do I have the most exposure from the Phillies? The player I have the most exposure to is actually Sean Kingery right now. Flat min price, somebody who we've seen have fantasy upside in the past, was formerly a top prospect that just never really worked out, but he's hitting 6th today. And the flat min price, to me, I think that he's a good value play on DraftKings. So he's the guy that, at least as a one-off, makes sense, because even if he doesn't have a good game, I mean, he's min price. You don't need all that much. And let's see, is he picking up any ownership right now? I haven't looked at the latest run yet.
No, he's not getting any under 1% ownership for Kingery. And yeah, it's kind of surprising given that people are going to Kevin Kiermaier. I agree. I think Kingery would be the pivot I would look at for Kiermaier, a little bit cheaper, actually has some pop at 209 ISO going against lefties since 2019. I think that Kingery, to me, 49% hard contact rate as well. I think that he is actually a very sneaky play today and very cheap and a guy you can go to. And Roman Quinn, I don't really hate either, but I think Kingery is a better play because you can play him at second base, you can play him at outfield on DraftKings. Talk about Aaron Nola for me here, because you mentioned he's clearly the best pitcher on the slate, 31% K rate for him over the last season and change. Going back to 2019, a 28% K rate. The swing strike numbers for him have been up. The velocity has been pretty much where it has been over the last couple of years, so no drop offs there. But really, it does seem like he's made some improvements here. And as you know, I've always struggled a little bit with power, or historically struggled more with power, but kind of closed that gap over the last season and change. I really don't find anything to point to that's a bad spot for Aaron Nola, other than the fact that I seemingly get the Cardinals wrong far more than I probably should.
Yeah, and it doesn't appear that our friend Eric Smith is in the YouTube chat today, but he'd be the first one to point out that you've been getting the Cardinals wrong, because even me too, if I mention anything about the Cardinals, that if you were to say like, hey, Paul Goldschmidt isn't the best first baseman in baseball, Nolan Arenado isn't the best third baseman, Carlos Martinez isn't an ace starting pitcher anymore, like he's all over that. Everybody's the best player in the world on the Cardinals. But here's the deal with Aaron Nola. We don't have good pitchers to choose from today. He's a very good pitcher. He's one of the best pitchers in baseball. His overall numbers from the year from a fantasy standpoint are a little underwhelming. He's only scored over 20 DraftKings points once. It actually was an outing against the Cardinals where he scored 48 DraftKings points, pitched, shut out, and struck out 10 guys last week. But look at his matchups this year. He has faced the Braves on opening day, then 2 games against the Mets, then he faced the Cardinals, then he pitched at Coors Field. So this has been just a terrible strength of schedule he's faced so far this year. And while he does have another matchup against the Cardinals, he has already had success in this matchup. That's not something I would necessarily look at, but I wouldn't look at the overall numbers for Aaron Nola and just say like, oh, there isn't that much upside because he's only had one good start this year. I would look at it as he's still been relatively successful despite a very difficult strength of schedule. And then you look at the other pitchers on the slate, it's like he's only $800 more than Chris Bassett, and Bassett's still relatively popular. That's just off to me. So I like being overweight to the field on Aaron Nola, and I'm pretty heavily underweight to the field on Chris Bassett just because they're about in the same price range on FanDuel and DraftKings.
I think it's reasonable. And Nola, as you know, we talked about here, the best strikeout stuff on the slate, does pitch fairly deep into games, pitching about 6 innings per start over the last season. And I think that to me is really a good reason to buy in here. I would still be reluctant to go over the field on him. And I think that to me is where I would be willing to go to Bassett a little bit more, because Nola's going to be 50% owned. I think that's a fine number, but I don't want to go crazy on a guy just given the fact that, again, the Cardinals do have some power hitters here. They have been a team that seemingly shows up when you don't think they should. And I think that's something that as that'll frighten me enough that I won't fully want to dive in on the Aaron Nola field, but he is going to be the best pitcher on the slate by a pretty wide margin. Hard to argue it. Going against the St. Louis lineup, 5 guys that strike out above league average, a 27% aggregate K rate. That's weighted a bit by Kim striking out a lot at the pitching spot, but still going to be a nice strikeout matchup for Nola. So he is probably the safest play. And if you are, for some reason, if you're a sadomasochist and you are playing cash games for MLB, Nola would be the cash game pitcher as well. The St. Louis stack, though, Greg, does look a bit a bit overowned, it does seem. I'm reading that wrong. Bit underowned on DraftKings in particular, also being a value stack, a 9% chance of being a top value today, only 2% ownership. And they're going against the best pitcher on the slate, Greg, but a guy who is not necessarily immune from blowups. What amount of Cardinals are you getting here? And I guess which Cardinals would you be getting, if any?
I have a few just for hedge purposes against my lineups, baseball, really high variance. And it's still not overall. It's a team I have very little interest in. The 2 teams I have the least amount of exposure to as a stack today are the Rays and the Cardinals. And I just have the Cardinals in there because I'm so overexposed to Aaron Nola, where he's in 3/4 of my lineups, that I would like it to be where, hey, if Nola doesn't pitch well, at least I have some lineups that are still alive. And maybe it's, one of those lineups that ends up being the nuts for me. But overall, I don't, in the grand scheme of things, I don't have that much interest in the Cardinals. And if you're somebody who only plays 1 or 3 lineups, then I would say play Nola and don't stack St. Louis at all.
Yeah, it's pretty reasonable here. Again, very low implied totals in this game. Does sort of look, according to the Vegas totals, like more of a pitcher's duel. So another reason to maybe go have more belief like Greg does in Kwang Hyun Kim than I do. But I definitely don't mind. It's a 4-game slate. I think you can stack whatever you want, and I won't be too mad about it. But definitely low implied totals for both sides in this game. And then we got one more game here, and then oh boy, we gotta really make this one work. Guess we'll have some time for questions too. So we'll leave a little bit here. If you have any questions, drop in the chat. We'll see them. And I see somebody asking one of the questions here from Coriel Jefferson asking best outfielder for 2,400 on the early only slate, which is what we're talking about here. I feel like you've talked me into Scott Kingery, and that's what would be my pick now.
I just wanted to ask him which site he's asking for. And then, okay, it's for Fanduel. He just answered. Okay. So let's see. I could go to Fanduel. I could just see which outfielder for 2,400 or less do I have the most exposure to. Brett Gardner is only 2,300 hitting in the 9-hole for the Yankees. Sean Haggerty is batting leadoff for the Mariners at 2,300 also, but I have a little bit more exposure to Brett Gardner. If you want to make Yankee stacks on FanDuel that are not the exact same as the Yankee stacks everybody else is making, Brett Gardner at 2,300 for the Yankees.
Yeah, Brett Gardner's actually got some pop. We talked about it earlier, but a 250 ISO going against Jorge Lopez, who's given up a lot of power. I feel like Sam Haggerty maybe hitting the leadoff spot may jump out to people a little bit more, but he just hasn't shown anything in terms of being a hitter in the majors so far. And Gardner, at least, has some pop and also good park, good weather, all the stuff we talked about earlier. But let's talk about Seattle here because we do have a matchup for them against Luis Garcia. Luis Garcia, not the biggest sample size in the majors over the last season and change, but 1.1 whip, 5.4 xFIP. That seems to indicate some bad things coming for him. Strikeout rate for him also not that great, a 21% K rate. At his price tag, Greg, I don't know how you get there more than the field's 5% projected ownership on DK, but are you getting any Luis Garcia today?
So I don't even understand why people are rostering him at all, to be honest. Like, that seems like a really high number for somebody who just pitched on Sunday in a relief role and pitched very limited innings. So I would be really surprised if he pitches more than, like 4 or 5 innings or anything like that. And he's really expensive, like you said. I mean, $8,500 for a guy who I think probably is only going to pitch 3 or 4 innings today, at most 5. And that even seems like a stretch to me, given it's a short rest and he only threw limited pitches last time he was out. I don't think anybody should be playing this guy at all. And so I don't even have him on my player pool. I just took him out in a fantasy cruncher.
Yeah, I agree. He's only pitching about 3 innings per appearance. And it does seem like a very lofty price tag. I guess the price up is just because Seattle's that bad. They have 6 guys that strike out above league average, a 29.5% aggregate K rate for their lineup today. So that, I guess, is the logic there. But I agree. It does seem like there's a decent chance they go to the bullpen a little bit earlier. And even Garcia himself, like, he doesn't have great strikeout stuff anyway. So I don't know. I wouldn't mind playing a little bit just because it's a short slate and it is going to be a 5% owned guy. But I agree. Like, he would not be a core fixture of my lineups. And I think you can't be surprised if he just gives you like 5 fantasy points and that's the day. On the Seattle hitters, though, Greg, they do have a much higher probability of being a top stack than their ownership. Actually, a decent chance of being a top value relative to their ownership. The top stack potential pretty much flat with their ownership on DraftKings, but they're going to be pretty well represented in the field today, which may be a little bit surprising. This is another spot, though, where the top of the order is driving a lot of the ownership. Sam Haggerty, a guy that Greg mentioned a few minutes ago, is going to be very highly owned on DraftKings. Kyle Seager also going to be very highly owned. Ty France, a little bit owned, and everybody else for the most part, besides Dylan Moore, under 5% owned. How are you handling Seattle here? Are you getting to them? Because I'm kind of baffled by the ownership here. I get they're a value stack that opens up, it makes it easier to get to Nola, maybe even get to Nola and Bassett, but this is not a great hitting team. And the pitcher they're going against is not bad enough that I want to target him.
So where I actually have a lot of interest in Seattle as I'm finalizing some of my ownerships right now is on FanDuel. So FanDuel, they have, they're only picking up an 8.9% ownership share compared to 12.5% chance we have them being the top stack on FanDuel. So we currently have them as the most positively leveraged stack on FanDuel at the moment. So that's where I think they make the most sense. The other thing too is, if I said that with Luis Garcia, I don't know how deep he's going to work into the game. He's also pretty expensive on DraftKings. We could see the Mariners face the Astros bullpen really early, and sometimes that could be a good thing or a bad thing. I just think it introduces a lot of variance. A lot of times you face relievers, it is guys who are generally better on a 1-inning basis, but then we don't know who they're going to out of the pen either, right? It could be some weaker relievers who they're expecting to stretch to throw 2 or 3 innings, and then maybe the Mariners get a couple runs on the board, and then the Astros don't want to bring in their best high leverage relievers because maybe they're behind in the game or for any reason like that. But then the other thing also is when teams are kind of going to a bullpen game where they're filtering a bunch of guys in or out, I always think you run the risk of this also. If you're going to be throwing 5-6 pitchers in a game, you run to a better chance that one of them just doesn't have their best stuff for the day. And so there's a lot of times where we see bullpen games where people be like, hey, I don't want to rush to the hitters. I don't want to rush to the pitchers either. And I think it's fine to be on the offense in the really low owned, just because you could run into one of those pitchers who just sucks for the day. We saw it happen there was a Yankees reliever who came in a few days ago, walked like 4 or 5 guys in a row. And then all of a sudden that just blows up. The entire stack blows up because of something like that. So I kind of like the variance that gets introduced when there's a potential bullpen game, also because the Mariners look so underowned on FanDuel.
I would say too, Houston's bullpen is not one that grades out particularly well. They're giving up a 1.4 whip over the last season, a 4.6 xFIP. So they're getting more strikeouts than I think you'd like to see, a 24% K rate for the bullpen. But I don't think their bullpen's like one that I'd be afraid of necessarily, which I think is really the main thing with opener style games. Garcia going to be pitching a little bit more than the opener, one would assume, but still not deep enough that you already get the bullpen here. And I don't think it's a great bullpen. So I guess that is 1 point for Seattle, but just going through the lineup here, it just scares me because there's so many guys who strike out here at a very high rate. You look at Haggerty's got a 36% K rate. Evan White's got a 37% K rate. Dylan Moore, 34%, Trammell, 38%, Tom Murphy, 34%. There's a lot of guys here that I just feel like could very much miss the ball entirely or not have a shot. That I don't have the highest faith in this stack, but are you willing to get to any of the bottom order guys, I guess? And are you willing to get to 5-man stacks, Seattle, just given the fact that they don't have a lot of quality hitters to make up that 5-man?
I mean, I have 5-man stacks them. So the answer is yes.
Okay.
Let's see. How much do I have of them? I have more of them than teams like St. Louis, Philadelphia, and Tampa Bay. It's a team that I have a moderate amount of interest in on DraftKings and a lot on FanDuel, just because I think they're going so underowned relative to our top stacks tool.
Okay, that's reasonable. And saying somebody in the chat saying Haggerty's going to steal a bag today. That's Evan Ballard saying that. Luis Garcia not shown up a lot of predisposition to giving up steals, at least compared to what you're looking for, but it's been a small sample size. So maybe you're right. Haggerty's at a 7% stolen base rate. So it's one of the better marks on the slate. Let's talk Houston real fast and we'll answer a couple questions. Now we got a few building up on YouTube chat. So drop them in there. We'll speed run through them after we finish talking about the Astros and Yusei Kikuchi, a pitcher who's been getting hit pretty hard over the last couple seasons. Going back to 2019, giving up a 230 ISO to the right-handed side of the plate, 290 batting average, as well as a 4.5% on run rate. Lefty's a little bit less adept at hitting him, but still giving up a lot more production you'd like to see from a lefty pitcher. Only a 20% K rate for him, a 4% on run rate allowed. And Houston's guys, top of the order here, looks pretty strong on, and also incredibly highly owned on DraftKings. This top 3 of Houston, you honestly could make the case maybe to play either none of them or not a lot, because they're going to be owned almost half the field on Bregman and Correa in particular. How are you handling this one, Greg, where I'm going to assume you don't love Kikuchi, but if you do, feel free to talk about him and then segue over to the Houston stack.
It's unfortunate because coming into the season, I liked Kikuchi a lot, just because last year his ERA wasn't great, except the underlying numbers were so good. And his velocity saw such an uptick last year that coming into the season, I was like, hey, Kikuchi, this is going to be an under the radar guy that I think could have a really good year. And he had a really good first start of the season, and it's just all gone to crap since then. It's a really tough matchup against Houston. Houston's also getting a bunch of their guys back from COVID now. They have Jose Altuve healthy. They have Alex Bregman healthy. Yordan Alvarez, unfortunately, he has contracted COVID for something like the 4th time now over the last year. Not that he actually has it, but he continues to get in contact with people who have had COVID, and then he goes into contact tracing. So even though he's out, though, this is still a really good Astros lineup overall. So Kikuchi to me is somebody who I don't really have much interest in. I have, let's see, my latest run, I have him in 3% of my lineups now. So no real interest there on Kikuchi.
Are you getting to the Houston? I feel like the Houston top of the order seems pretty obvious. It's going to be the guys that we know are good. Jose Altuve, Bregman, Correa, Yuli Gurriel also picking up a good amount of ownership. But the way to get different with Houston does seem to include a guy like our good friend Chuck McCormick, Chris McCormick, whatever you want to call him. Taylor Jones also not picking up much ownership. And I guess, has looked competent enough overall, facing his 30 batters that he's faced, or 30 pitchers that he's faced so far. Miles Straw has speed, not much else to point to. Are you getting to any Houston bottom of the order guys, or would it mostly be just take the stars and just hope they get to Kikuchi early?
So, I had a lot of exposure to Houston until we had their lineup come out, because then like somebody like Kyle Tucker was one of the most exposed hitters, and obviously he wasn't in the lineup. So that really threw off my construction a lot. I have some exposure to McCormick. I have some exposure to Straw, double-digit ownership to both those guys. But, I mean, that's nothing really crazy for a 4-game slate. The guys I have the most exposure to here are Jose Altuve and Alex Bregman, which is not a crazy take at all, but those are also, to me, and also Carlos Correa. I think I'm fine with those 3 as one-offs. Overall, as a stack, the Astros look like they're going a little bit over-owned. So I don't have a ton of 5-man stacks them relative to the field, but the stars I do have as one-offs.
It's weird. This is another team too, where the bottom of the order is going to be completely unknown. They still have a higher probability of being a top stack in their ownership on DraftKings by a little bit. But it does seem, like you're playing the stars here, and the actual star part of the stack is going to be, I would say, 33% owned. So definitely going to be tough margins here, but it's a 4-game slate. So you got to try to track that upside. And let's jump over, take a few questions from the chat right now. So hit that like button, guys. And of course, subscribe to the channel. We have content coming on all day long, including the MLB Deeper Dive for the main slate coming up at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific time. So make sure to tune into that. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you can see everything that goes on for the MLB, NBA, PGA, all the stuff going on here all day long. Brian Claremont, I keep saying that name wrong. Thoughts on Gio Urshela on DraftKings and Fanduel is what he's asking. And Gio, to me, looks like one of the over-owned Yankees again, but I guess relative to Gleyber Torres and Rougned Odor, I'd prefer Urshela to those guys, Greg. But how are you feeling about him, and is it different on DraftKings or FanDuel?
So, I mean, on FanDuel, he's only 2,700, which makes him, to me, somebody who's hard to stay away from entirely. My overall most rostered third baseman on DraftKings today is Alex Bregman. And then I have a bunch of guys just kind of in the mix, right? Urshela is one of them. Kyle Seager, Matt Chapman. I have all those guys grouped pretty closely together. So that is going to have me underweights to the field on Gio Urshela. My priority at third base is Alex Bregman. But just given that's a 4-game slate, even though he's really popular, to me, I'm more apt to go underweights to the field on him than just fade him outright. I find that really hard to do, at least for me, when I'm playing 150 lineups and it's only a 4-game slate. But I'm underweight to the field on him.
We also got a question here from Caleb asking one-off for O'Neill. Been kind of hot recently, and a good chance all pitchers give something up. O'Neill's certainly always been a power guy there. A couple years ago, for the long-time Awesemo fans out there, maybe there's 1 or 2 of you in the chat right now. Jake, Hari, and I used to call Tyler O'Neill, really more me. I'm gonna blame Jake, but I'll say it was probably more me. Tyler O'Neill, we used to call him Sexy Muscles because he's a big power hitter who has sexy muscles on him. It's hard to dispute Tyler O'Neill's power upside. So you won't get any gripes from me about Tyler O'Neill just trying to track a home run for him at 2,600 on DraftKings, but he's going against Nola. Nola has sort of curbed some of the power issues that he's had historically. So it's not a confidence play by any stretch, but at under 1% ownership, sure, you can play your Tyler O'Neill.
I would say if you're just playing 1 or 3 lineups, don't play Tyler O'Neill or really any Cardinals. To me, just the only reason to play stacks against Nola or players against him is if you're playing a bunch of lineups and you're looking for a little bit of leverage, because in general, I don't think that's an optimal play for this slate.
All right. And let's no other good questions in chat. If you got any more, drop them in there. Let me check the premium Slack to make sure I didn't miss anything in here.
I just realized I missed a reference from earlier. I was going to say that Tyler O'Neill looks like he should be named Ryan Mountcastle.
Actually, that is very true. Strong man and only hits home runs. Nothing else is good. Seth in the chat, I think trolling EMAC. If a screenshot's good, EMAC roll, will that be into the Awesemo Hall of Game? Okay, that's Seth is just saying gibberish.
Seth, stick to your intramural basketball games, please.
Let's see. Giles asking, do you like Bassett? I like Bassett more than Greg does. Greg was not a Bassett fan. Let's do a home run pick before we close out the show. We got enough time here to hit on one, and I'll let you pick first, Greg. And I swear to God, if you pick like Alex Bregman or Correa, I will not be the happiest with you.
So does that mean you want me to pick Giancarlo Stanton?
If that's where you want to go, if you want to be Eric Lindquist and be the chalk of MLB, please go ahead.
No, I'm not going to do that, but I'm just uploading my lineups right now, and then I'll look at. Why don't you go first this time, okay, and then I'll go because I'm finishing uploading my lineups.
All right, so Greg will finish up his lineups, and I'm going to take, in the meantime, a guy that he wouldn't have taken anyway, because I'm going to dig deep here. Brent Gardner hitting in the 9 hole, I think, hits a home run. And his first, we're going to get real specific here, his first at bat against Jorge Lopez. Jorge Lopez, even worse against lefties, get up at 6.1 xFIP, a 311 batting average, and a 6. How is he still in the majors? 6% home run rate allowed to lefties. And Brent Gardner does have that pop. Rougned Odor maybe benefits too, but I'll take Brent Gardner hitting in the 9 hole as my home run pick.
All right. Boy, it would really be on brand if I could hit a Ryan Mountcastle homer right here. But no, I'm going to go with Pedro Severino, who I think is one of the better cheap catcher plays on DraftKings today at 3,400. Somebody who's historically always hit left-handed pitching very, very well. And Do I think he's the most likely player to homer? No, except I think that just for a catcher position, he presents upside and value on DK. So there's my home run pick, Pedro Severino, going off the board. No chalk there. I've absolved myself from any kind of jokes.
There you go. I appreciate the bravery that you're showing there. If you guys got any home run picks, drop in the chat here. Let's see. How about an Eric voice for the road, Spags?
Oh, how about, okay, wait.
Yeah.
I want it. What's Eric's home run pick for today? What chalk player is he going to go with?
Well, I think you could say it's hard to argue Giancarlo Stanton, 55% ownership, but make that 75%. That's how confident I am. And Giancarlo Stanton, home run pick of the poor Eric. Eric's not even awake yet, maybe on the West Coast. He's just getting voiced to death here. Greg, give the people the plugs here before we jump off.
Follow me on Twitter at Ehrenberg Dfs. And by the way, I'm going to be doing NBA Live Before Lock tonight with none other than Eric Lindquist and his Mickey Mouse voice. So stick around. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the video, and definitely you want to subscribe because you want to see Eric and me do the. He might get. There's a chance he'll get made fun of on the show too. I'm not going to lie. There's a chance.
I would say a high probability. Tune into me on the tip-off coming up 1 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. East Coast time. It is me, Ben, Rasa, and Kayla. So I would say a dream team there, though every tip-off show has a dream team. And follow at Chris Spags, follow Ehrenberg DFS. Check the pin tweet at Awesemo_com to get your chance to win a free year of Awesemo Plus. If just by guessing some things for the NFL draft. We appreciate all you guys for watching. Hope you have a great early slate. Tune into the MLB Deeper Dive coming up at 3 p.m. Eastern on this channel. We'll see you guys again soon. Good luck.